I am here to represent Somali interests, which, in case you didn't know, that's not what Congress is for. Usually you represent the interests of the American people, not the interests of a country that you fled as a refugee to come here. And then I do want to explain what actually is going on in Somalia, because it actually is interesting, and from a U.S. interest standpoint, we have an actual interest in doing the exact opposite thing that Ilhan Omar wants and is preaching about, being a Somali congresswoman rather than a U.S. congresswoman. Speaking to her Somali First constituents, this is Ilhan Omar. We as Somalians, we love each other, okay? There are areas of friction that have led us to kill each other, but in reality, we are an organized society. I beg to differ, brothers and sisters, people of the same blood, a little racist, people who know they are Somali first, okay? Muslims second, who protect another to come each other's old and aid. Oh no, this is going too fast now. But basically she said Somali and Muslim, Somali first, Muslim second. Then she says the US is going to do what we tell them to do. They will do nothing else. We as Somalis must have the confidence in ourselves. Bottom line is, she's basically saying we are going to look out for the interests of Somalis first here in America. Okay, wait. The US government will do what we want, nothing else. They must follow our orders. That's how we safeguard the interests of Somalia, which again is not the goal and objective of somebody who sits in the U.S. House of Representatives in Congress. The goal is to guard the interests of the American people, but again, we don't need to reiterate that, and goes on to say a bunch of other stuff, basically pledging allegiance to Somalia, which is again a country so war-torn that she left there to come here and now wants to make here there, which is, but I do want to try this new thing. I don't know what we'll call this segment, Geography with Jobob, because I do want to explain what's going on here and where the U.S. interests probably actually lie, which is not in the best interest of Somalia, because again, we are looking out for us and ourselves and the U.S., and we are not looking out solely for the interests of a foreign country where people had to leave as refugees to seek asylum here because it sucked so much. I want to take you on a map here. This is, again, well, I don't know, we'll call this segment Geography with Jobob. Okay, so if you look around here, this is Somalia. This seven-shaped area. I don't know if you can see the mouse here. If you ever wonder where Somali pirates, or why Somali pirates are like a thing that you know about, well, it's because this gulf here that leads into the Red Sea is a big shipping lane. This is also where you have the, what's it called, the Suez Canal. So big ships carrying lots of stuff coming from Europe and going through the Suez Canal into the Red Sea and then out into the Indian Ocean and to wherever they want to go in the world. That is why Somalia is famous for the Somali pirates, which, good news, have been thwarted by efforts to dissuade Somali pirates, including armed people, armed, effectively military, on ships coming out of the Red Sea and going to the rest of the world. But anyways, that's why Somalia, if you've heard of Somali pirates, that's because their geography is where it is. Now, one thing that I feel like goes not understated, but isn't talked about enough, is that pretty much all wars, in a lot of ways, are over geography. What she's talking about here is we will defend Somali interests in the U.S. government, there is now tension between, well, there's always been tension, but there is tension between Ethiopia, right here, and Somalia, which, again, borders Ethiopia and the coast. If you don't know this about Ethiopia, Ethiopia is the 11th most populous state, most populous nation state, most populous country in the world. They have 120 million people, bringing them in at 11th in terms of population. Also, if you've noticed from a map, this is the border of Ethiopia. Ethiopia does not have any oceans with easy access. In other words, they are landlocked entirely by countries that border them and then the coast. Well, what does that mean? What problems could that create? Well, Ethiopia being the biggest country population-wise that is entirely landlocked restricts their trade to the outside world. So for the last 30 or so years, there has been talks about Ethiopia making sure that they have access to the ocean. Currently, a lot of their imports and exports, so much as they have them, come through ports in Djibouti, which is this tiny small place that Ethiopia Ethiopia is friendly with, that ships can come through here and they can import on railroads all the way to Addis Ababa, which is their capital, and they can also export through Addis Ababa through trains and get through Djibouti. Now, here's the problem. Djibouti, rightfully so, obviously looking out for their own best interest, charges Ethiopia a bunch of money in order to import and export through their ports. So, what Ethiopia wants ultimately is some land here that will get them to the ocean. To the north is Eritrea, which in like 1990s, 1992, somewhere in the 90s, used to all be one more broadly unified Ethiopia, but Eritrea has broken off from Ethiopia. Now, why can't they go take some Eritrean land? Well, the Eritreans are described as the North Korea of Africa. If you don't know this about Eritrea, they are a military dictatorship run by the same guy who was put in charge, or who was in charge, established to be in charge when Ethiopia and Eritrea split. Now, obviously, in the last 30 years, Ethiopia has had a massive growth. We can talk about the Grand Renaissance Dam that is also part of the conflict with them and Egypt. Just briefly, they're building a big old dam that starts at the head of the Nile River, which, if you look at this map here, if you don't know this, all of the population of Egypt is along the Nile River, because the Nile River is extremely important. And Ethiopia built a dam at the Blue Nile, I believe, which is one of the biggest tributaries, because they want to generate power for their people. So, bottom line is, Ethiopia is a massively growing and establishing themselves nation state, and they, in their huge population and their want and ability to be a player on the world stage, wants an ocean port. So if Eritrea is out, Djibouti they're still friendly with, well, Somalia does have a lot of population in this area, Mogadishu being the capital there. Somalia is a great place for Ethiopia to maybe carve out a small portion of this area, maybe right here, that says, all right, this is now Ethiopia and we now have access to the ocean. Is it a perfect deep sea port? No, it's not. That exists probably only in Djibouti. But overall, just having access to the ocean would be hugely beneficial for Ethiopia. So, all of that is to say, when Ilhan Omar is saying that we are looking out for Somali interests, especially against Ethiopia, she wants to get the U.S. involved in an armed conflict that may exist between Ethiopia and Somalia, because Ethiopia, being the 11th largest country in the world, needs ocean access. And if they decide to attack or even occupy small portion of Somalia, Ilhan Omar, a congressional representative in the United States of America, wants to solely look out for the Somali government here and say, no, the U.S. has to get involved here, which I think is something that a lot of people don't want to have happen. At the end of the day, neither of these countries, no country in this region really, I guess aside, well, not even Yemen. Yemen has heard a lot about Yemen and Iran, who's the Yemenis fighters over here being backed by Iran and attacking U.S. troops in Jordan up here, which again just happened over the weekend, which is a terrible situation. But this region of the world, this part of Northeast Africa, doesn't have the ability to expand into a global war, in which case any conflict here is probably going to just be a regional conflict, despite the fact that Ilhan Omar, looking out for the best interest of Somalia and not the U.S., says that we need to get involved militarily if Ethiopia, who wants sea access, decides to get involved in Somalia. Sorry, decides to take land from Somalia. Ilhan Omar wants the United States to get involved. So at the end of the day, and the bottom line here, and I realize this was a geography lesson that you didn't want probably, and you didn't know you needed, or you didn't know that you didn't want. At the end of the day, it doesn't seem like the U.S. would have any interest in caring about this at all. If anything, considering the fact that Ethiopia can be a burgeoning economic hub for international trade and global commerce, it would seem that the United States, if they had any interest, which I don't think they should have any interest, but if they had any interest whatsoever in this region, would be, yeah, let's go ahead and get Ethiopia some sea access so they can trade with American partners around the world.